Sojourner Truth, circa 1797 to 1883. Born a slave named Isabella Baumfree in New York, the National Women's History Museum reported that Sojourner Truth ran away in 1827 to an abolitionist family that helped her buy her freedom. Although she never learned to read or write, Truth was a charismatic speaker who came to work as a traveling preacher. Through the course of her work, Truth also became a vocal advocate for abolition, temperance, and women's rights. Her "Ain't I a Woman" speech championed true equality and called for all women, regardless of their race, to be treated as men's equals. Harriet Tubman, circa 1820 to 1913. After escaping slavery in 1849, Harriet Tubman, whose exact date of birth is unknown, helped hundreds of other slaves to freedom via a network of secret routes and safe houses known as the Underground Railroad. While the Underground Railroad was not run by one single individual or organization, biography notes that Tubman is likely its most famous conductor. Along with helping slaves escape to freedom, Tubman was also a vocal abolitionist who aided the Union Army as a spy during the Civil War. Florence Nightingale, 1820 to 1910. Whether you know her as the Lady with the Lamp or the Mother of Nursing, chances are you already know a little something about Florence Nightingale. Born to a wealthy English family, as they traveled abroad in Florence, Italy, no less, the National Women's History Museum reported Nightingale claimed to have been called by God as a teen to help the poor and sick. She abandoned her parents' dreams of marriage and instead studied nursing in Germany and France. Upon returning to England in 1853, she was made the superintendent of a hospital in London and later called to treat soldiers wounded in the Crimean War. According to the National Women's History Museum, Nightingale's ideas about cleanliness, sanitation, and nutrition brought the British military field hospital's death rate down from 40% to 2% in just 6 months. She continued to advocate for improved hospital conditions and safe nursing practices after the Crimean War ended and is largely credited with spurring early worldwide healthcare reform. Susan B. Anthony, 1820 to 1906. When thinking of moments where history changed for women, it's hard not to think of women's suffrage. For women in the United States, the right to vote came thanks to the tireless work of suffragettes like Susan B. Anthony. Raised as a Quaker, Anthony was reportedly inspired by her religious beliefs to view everyone, men and women, as equal, according to the National Women's History Museum. After meeting Frederick Douglass, she became a vocal abolitionist. In 1851, Anthony met fellow suffragette Elizabeth Cady Stanton, another woman who changed history, kick-starting more than 50 years of collaborated work fighting for women's rights. Of course, Anthony is not the only person to have pushed for women's rights. Sarah Breedlove, known as Madam C. J. Walker, 1867 to 1919. Born to former slaves under the name Sarah Breedlove in 1867, the woman who would later become known as Madam C. J. Walker is believed to have been America's first black woman millionaire. Time magazine has called her life story one of the most spectacular rags-to-riches stories in U.S. history. Made an orphan at 7, PBS reported Walker married at 14 to escape the abusive household she grew up in. Sadly, that marriage was fairly short, and, at 20, Walker was a widowed single mother earning just $1.50 a day as a washerwoman, according to Time. When Walker began losing her hair, she sought out a treatment, eventually developing her own product for hair growth and, later, launching an entire product line. Her savvy skills in sales and business propelled her to become the first female self-made millionaire. Marie Curie, 1867 to 1934. Born in Poland, Marie Curie moved to France in her 20s to study at the Sorbonne, where she earned degrees in physics and mathematics. After marrying Pierre Curie in 1895, the two worked together to discover the radioactive elements polonium and radium, according to Smithsonian Magazine. When rumors of a Nobel Prize began circulating, some within the French Academy of Sciences attempted to credit Curie's work in radioactivity to her husband. Although they did do much of their work together, Smithsonian Magazine claims Pierre was insistent that it was Curie who'd originated their research, conceived experiments, and generated theories about the nature of radioactivity. The Curies were awarded a Nobel Prize together with Henri Becquerel in 1903, making Curie the first woman to ever receive the award. She would be awarded a second Nobel Prize in 1911. During World War I, she outfitted more than a dozen portable X-ray units that could be driven onto battlefields to aid wounded soldiers. Margaret Sanger, 1879 to 1966. Margaret Sanger is credited as the founder of Planned Parenthood. She was an outspoken advocate of contraception and reproductive rights at a time when both family planning and women's health care were considered largely taboo topics. According to the National Women's History Museum, Sanger's lifework was largely inspired by her childhood and the death of her mother, a woman whose physical health suffered after birthing 11 children. Sanger believed that if women could control the number of children they had, the cycle of women's poverty could be ended. In 1914, despite laws prohibiting the distribution of information pertaining to birth control, Sanger began a publication that advocated for it. 2 years later, she opened America's first birth control clinic in Brooklyn, according to the National Women's History Museum. She later opened a second clinic in 1923 staffed by female doctors and social workers that later became the beginnings of the Planned Parenthood we know today. Jeanette Rankin, 1880 to 1973. Jeanette Rankin is the first woman to have ever been elected to Congress. Born in Montana to a rancher and a schoolteacher, she worked briefly as a social worker before becoming a professional lobbyist for the National American Woman Suffrage Association, according to the U.S. House of Representatives archives. She was sworn into the House as a representative of Montana in 1917. A known pacifist, Rankin is reported to be the only member of Congress to have voted against U.S. participation in both World War I and World War II. Politics aside, Rankin opened the door for women's participation in Congress. Rosa Parks, 1913 to 2005. It's more than likely that I don't need to remind you of Rosa Parks' contribution to America's civil rights movement. Her refusal to give up her bus seat to a white man in 1955 inspired Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s Montgomery bus boycott and a pushback against segregation laws. According to History.com, Parks wrote in her autobiography that she hadn't refused to give up her seat because she was physically tired, but because she was tired of giving in. She was given a suspended sentence and fined $14 for violating segregation laws. She was, decades later, awarded the Congressional Gold Medal and is today a widely recognized figure within the civil rights movement.